Hey everybody, great to be learning with you today as we begin our studies of the 12th chapter of Masechet Shabbat and take a look at what the Mishnah describes as some of the basic laws related to Binyan, the laws of building. Our goals for today's lesson are to first get a better understanding of what the malacha of Binyan actually involves, and then to look at some of the specific activities of Binyan that are described by the Mishkan, and to see which of them are allowed and which are not. When the Mishnah here talks about Binyan, it's talking about part of the series of 39 malachot, which we began to explore back in Perek Zayin, which actually outlines all of the 39 malachot in the second Mishnah. But this malacha of Binyan is a little bit different than other malachot because it involves actual construction of real items using real tools. The way that people would construct things in the Mishkan, which we'll explore in just a bit, is at the heart of this malacha, the creation of new items using utensils that are intended to create rather than to destroy. So let's take a look now at some of the specific activities that the Mishnah describes that are not allowed to be performed on Shabbat because of this malacha of Binyan. The Mishnah begins by saying, Habona kol shehu, if you build in any amount, in any degree, and here the kind of building that we're talking about has to do with the patching up of walls. You see, the Mishkan was a portable structure, and the walls had to be assembled. And we wanted to make sure that those walls remained firm in place. And so if there was a concern that the walls might not be totally firmed up, for example, if wormwood would eat away at some of the walls, we would occasionally patch up those walls with some molten lead. And that would be an activity that could be done in the course of reassembling the Mishkan, not on Shabbat, where as they would put up the walls, they would notice that some of the walls may have fallen into disrepair. And so they'd patch it up. That kind of patching is not allowed to be done on Shabbat because it falls under this category of binyan, of making a repair, of making something serviceable. The next activity the Mishnah talks about is known as Masechet, which is to chisel stone. And even though that may seem at first glance to be a destructive activity, you're chiseling, it's actually constructive. Because by chiseling some of the rock away from the broader piece of stone that you're working with, you're actually creating a shape or a design that is desired. So that's constructive. That would not only fall under the category of binyan, but also makah b'patish. Makah b'patish is defined as striking the final blow. When you're working in a quarry, where there's lots of stone, you would dislodge pieces of stone from the quarry by striking a blow. And that final blow that would eventually result in the dislodging of the individual rock from the quarry is known as makah b'patish. And more generally, this malacha of makah b'patish is used to describe any activity that is the final stage in preparing something for use. So when you finally make something serviceable or useful on Shabbat, that's considered to be a violation of the av malacha of makah b'patish. The Mishnah also goes into some other actions that require hitting, just not with a hammer. So one of those is with a ma'atzad, which is defined as either an adze or a sledgehammer. And any person who would use these utensils, an adze or a sledgehammer, to strike an object for the purpose of creating something, that would fall under the category of binyan and would not be allowed. Additionally, anyone who drills a hole, which again may seem destructive, but is designed to create a new structure which would be constructive, because you're trying to build something by drilling out a hole, that malacha of hakodeach would also fall under the category of binyan and would also be problematic. So let's put it all together. If a person was masechet, he chiseled, or he was makah b'patish uva ma'atzad, or he hit with a hammer or a ma'atzad, which is an adze or a sledgehammer, or hakodeach, or he drilled a hole, kol shehu, in any amount, in any degree, we say that that person is chayav because of bona. In each of these cases, a person has done something constructive, and that is what the definition of binyan is, engaging in an activity that is constructive by nature, that is designed to create something else. The Mishnah now concludes with a general rule. Kol ha'oseh malacha, someone who does an action, umalachto mitkayemed, and the action endures, chayav. He is chayav on Shabbat. When we talk about an enduring action, we're talking about an action that is useful in and of itself. Think about the examples we just covered. Chiseling rock, striking a final blow with a hammer or an axe, or drilling a hole to produce something serviceable. All of these actions are in and of themselves useful. They produce something that is desired. They're not simply stage one of a multi-stage process. They are useful and serviceable and produce something that is constructive by nature. And therefore, any of these actions which are done that are of themselves constructive are liable for a korban chatat if they are done on Shabbat. Now, Rabban Gamliel comes in at the end of the Mishnah here and says, not only that, but even if you were doing something that wasn't designed for the activity itself, but rather a related activity, you could still be liable. Take the following example. When blacksmiths, people who work with metal, are working on their craft, oftentimes they want to make sure that there are no ridges in the finished product. And so every so often, they'll strike their hammer against an anvil, which is that big gray flat structure that you see in front of you on the screen. An anvil was part of the forging process, and people would basically put their metal on the anvil and strike it into the desired shape or form. And depending on the size and shape of the anvil and depending on its density, you'd get a certain look or feel or weight to the metal that you're working with as a blacksmith. So let's say the blacksmith is working on the metal and wants to make sure that the metal that he's working on doesn't have any jagged edges. So he'll take his hammer, known as a kurnus, over here in the terms of the Mishnah, and he'll strike the hammer on the anvil, known as a sadan. And he does that not to produce any specific constructive end. He's not actually working on the metal. He's working on his hammer, which itself is not designed to be built into anything. But Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel comes in and says that that too is a problem. Even someone who strikes the hammer on the anvil would be considered to be liable for binyan because there's something constructive to what he's doing. It may not be geared towards the final product that he's trying to produce, but by taking that hammer and striking it on the anvil, that is a problem. So in the words of the Mishnah, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, Af hamaka bekornus al hasadan b'shat malacha, someone who takes the hammer and strikes it on the anvil at the time that he's working on metal, chayav. He's still liable for a korban chatat, mipnei shehu kimetakin malacha, because he's developing a smoother tool that he can then use in the process of creating his product. And that too would be considered binyan, even though it's not directly related to the object he's trying to work on or create. Anything that would improve the item that he's working on is constructive and would be part of the malacha of binyan. So in this lesson, we had a chance to define the malacha of binyan and look at some practical applications that are defined by the Mishnah. Out of this malacha, though, we have to explore some other practical applications about doing constructive work on Shabbat. And then take a look at the opposite of this. If binyan is constructive, then what about destructive acts? Are those problematic on Shabbat? We'll take a look and find out the next time when we come together and learn together. Looking forward to learning with you when we return.